With us to unpack the situation is Dr. Christian Leuprecht, who is, among other things, a security and defense expert. He is also a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University. Dr. Leuprecht, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello, Nima. My pleasure.
So lots happening in Eastern Europe right now, Doctor. Give our viewers a quick update on the current military situation on the ground along the Ukraine and Russian border.
Yeah, so everybody will have heard of the Russian buildup. What's important is the type of buildup. So Russia has amassed about 60 battle groups. So that is a considerable amount of firepower. But what we don't currently see is columns. That is to say, lining up, moving out, for instance, of the garrisons. We don't see reservists being called up. We're still missing the field hospitals. We would expect to see significant sort of supply chains being stood up. When the Ukrainian government says that an invasion does not appear imminent, it's either that the Russians are not at the point where they feel they can operationalize this, or that they're planning for a very quick campaign that ultimately doesn't require those elements.
And considering that both Ukraine and Boris Johnson yesterday said that this attack is not imminent, why are all sides in this shoring up their forces if there is no imminent threat in the first place?
Well, one of the concerns is that Russia is trying to stage a counter-revolution in Kiev, and that it's keeping its forces essentially in reserve. So that it's using its intelligence operatives that are already embedded across Ukrainian institutions, essentially to install a government that is favorable to Russia. So that would mean a conflict, but it wouldn't mean a war. But it does mean that tensions remain high, and anytime the territorial integrity, the political stability, the economic prosperity, or social harmony of Europe is threatened, that's ultimately a challenge for the NATO alliance. It's a threat to Canada's, the UK's, and allied interests. And so a moment for everybody to step up and to reinforce.
And this seems to be all around NATO's potential expansion, which Russia does not want it to expand to any ex-Soviet nations. Is it even possible for us to reach a political solution or compromise? And if so, what are the options, Doctor?
Well, the Russians have a rather curious revisionist reading of post-Cold War history in order to justify the positions that they are taking. In good Russian fashion, of course, they don't want to recognize the sovereignty of independent states. They would rather keep everybody as vassal states, as we see in Belarus, in Georgia, and in Ukraine. And the Russians are trying to cut out the Europeans of negotiations, trying to have these bilateral negotiations with the United States, which I think is highly unfortunate that the Americans are buying into this idea of negotiating the future of Europe directly with the Russians rather than with the Europeans. Russia keeps violating basic premises of international law. It negotiates outside of its obligations of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. So I'm not optimistic that Russia really has a commitment to a diplomatic solution, except for trying to extort some sort of concessions from the United States.
All right, Dr. Leuprecht, a little over a minute left here, but moving to Canada, yesterday Justin Trudeau refused to answer any questions about Canada sending weapons to Ukraine or extending the Canadian training mission there. So why the secrecy around this when Ukraine is actually asking Canada to do these things?
Well, you want to keep your options open. On the one hand, you don't want to antagonize the Russians and pour fuel on the fire. On the other hand, this is a highly dynamic situation, and Canada in these sorts of situations will draft behind its allies, in particular the United States, also to some extent the UK, but also its European allies. And so I think it's looking for what the trajectory is that its partners and allies are taking in that regard before making a commitment.
All right, just about 30 seconds left here, Dr. Leuprecht, but this may be an unfair question, perhaps. What is the likelihood of a large-scale conflict?
So on the one hand, people seem to think that you can contain this conflict to Ukraine and that we can manage spillover effects. I personally think that's delusional. Anytime you have a conflict in continental Europe, there are serious risks of unintended consequences, spillover effects, people misinterpreting intentions and signals. And we never know also to what extent Vladimir Putin has other Eastern European countries in his crosshairs, for instance, the Baltic states that remain highly vulnerable. So I think this is a time to be extremely cautious and to be a good and robust deterrent ally for Canada.
All right, Dr. Leuprecht, thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.